DELILAs. DELILAs. DELILAs.
While at the doctor's office, she had fallen asleep and was awoken by the mild tap of the lab attendant. "Your result is ready, ma." She was handed an envelope. Tabitha's heart raced as she opened the envelope slowly to reveal what was written inside. "Oh my God!" Tabitha immediately sat up. Her eyes widened. "Congratulations, ma. You are pregnant." The news of her pregnancy filled her with overwhelming joy. The moment she has been waiting for was finally here. The lab attendant's words echoed in her mind, and she couldn't help but smile as she exited the hospital. Back in her room, Tabitha was swamped with excitement as she sat at the edge of her bed. She was ecstatic. Her efforts with David weren't in vain after all. She also, however, pondered how David would take the news. She imagined David's reaction when she tells him. Would he be thrilled to be having another baby and then give their relationship a chance? Or will he react differently? She shuddered at the uncertainty of how David will take it. He might insist I get rid of it, she thought, her fingers scrolling through her phone contact for David's number. The fear of another rejection weighed heavily on her, and she knew she had to tread carefully. Tabitha at that point made the decision not to tell David until the pregnancy was a few months old and too late for termination. Weeks turned into months, and Tabitha's anticipation had reached its peak. She couldn't wait longer. Her pregnancy was approaching its 4th month, and terminating it wasn't possible anymore. Alone in her room, she reached for her phone and began to dial David's number. Nervous, her mind wavered as the number dialed. Meanwhile, David was at a children's park helping Evelyn into a playhouse when his phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting the father-daughter moment. He pulled it out and his expression soared. "Can she just let us be?" he muttered as he dismissed the call and put the phone back into his pocket. Tabitha's excitement turned into disappointment as she dialed David's number repeatedly and got the same cold rejection. Infuriated, she grabbed her handbag and stormed out of her apartment, heading for David's. David had returned home with Evelyn. They sat in the living room watching a children's show together when the doorbell rang. David went to get the door, and when he opened it, his eyes widened. "Why are you here, Tabitha?" His voice held a hint of irritation. "You can't ignore me forever." Her voice steadied as she walked past David into his living room, heading straight to Evelyn. "My baby, I have missed you." Tabitha scooped Evelyn from the chair. David slammed his door closed. "We are doing just fine, Tabitha. You didn't need to stop by." Tabitha ignored his words, focusing on Evelyn's innocent gaze. "What do you say about being a big sister soon, Evelyn?" she asked, fluttering her eyes playfully at Evelyn. "What do you mean?" David's voice cracked, his eyes almost piercing through her. "I am pregnant, David," Tabitha blurted. David stumbled backward as if the ground had opened beneath him. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "That's not possible." His mind raced as his memory flashed briefly to the night of Evelyn's birthday. His incoherent state that night. Tabitha leaning towards him in Anna's robe. Him muttering Anna's name. "Here," Tabitha's words interrupted his thoughts. She handed him a lab test result. "It's confirmed. I am 4 months pregnant with our baby. You and me," she said firmly. David's words crumbled all over again. This time, it wasn't just dishonoring Anna's memory he had to grapple with. It was the weight of family and friends' disappointment in him for impregnating Anna's best friend. "You can't keep it, Tabitha," he muttered, his voice strained. Tabitha already had a resolve and it was unchangeable. "Of course I am keeping my baby, David," she declared, her tone determined. She dropped Evelyn. David's mind raced again as he began to blot out his fears. "What will everyone say? The town, my family, our friends," his voice shaking. "You were my fiancé's best friend, Tabitha, for God's sake, and everyone knew that." Tabitha's expression shifted from trying to be convincing to stern. She took a deep breath. "Maybe it's time you consider my option, David. You don't want to remain in this town with this recent development." Her eyes furrowed. "The people here will devour you for this, and I will watch through it while having my very healthy baby." She rubbed her stomach. David stood gobsmacked. He realized any further plea will meet a dead end. "Let me know when it's convenient for you to go meet my parents," Tabitha continued, lifting her bag. "I called them already. They can't wait to meet their much talked about handsome son-in-law to be." She blew a kiss at stunned David as she exited the apartment. David, dazed, his eyes followed Tabitha as the door closed behind her. His legged fists to the spot. He had been caught in a storm. His mind lost that he didn't even notice his daughter stretching the remote at him. From the day of Tabitha's announcement, David's sleepless nights stretched. Each dawn brought its own wave of anxiety. The once prime and proper David now felt like a wrecking ship tossed between societal expectations and his entangled reality. The thought of Anna's disheartening soul dismissing him, the town's judgmental gaze sneering at him, his family and friends admonishing him. Why her best friend? He had let everyone down. One Monday morning, while David was handing Evelyn over to her daycare nanny, his phone started to vibrate in his pocket. He tried to recollect the unknown number calling before he picked. "Hello," David answered, trying to decipher the voice from the other end. "How are you, Mr. David? This is Mrs. Andrews speaking, Tabitha's mom." David's heart skipped as he greeted with a stutter. "My daughter has told us lots of lovely things about you. We will be expecting you soon, Mr. David." Her father and siblings extended their greetings. "Take very good care of our daughter," the elderly female voice concluded, and the call ended. It dawned on David. Tabitha was serious when she said her parents were expecting him. Unsteady, he found a stool at the daycare to lean on. He hadn't promised her marriage. It was just a one-time encounter. Everything is happening so fast, and he had not felt bold enough to open up to anyone yet. David felt trapped, and he knew no one was coming to break him free from this entrapment. Tabitha's sudden appearance at David's office was unexpected. Weeks had passed since her last visit to his house. Their last encounter had been accompanied by a barrage of text messages, voicemails from Tabitha informing David of the things she needed for antenatal and the items he needed to take to her family for their visit. David, still conflicted, had ignored all her messages. "Your friend is here, David," his colleague announced in a whisper, pushing his head through David's office door. "Friend?" David seemed bemused. "I am not expecting anyone." "The one from Evelyn's birthday," his colleague responded as he stepped aside for Tabitha to enter. "Tabitha!" David stood swiftly and immediately signaled for his colleague to leave. "Why are you at my workplace?" Tabitha sat. "David, we need to talk," she said calmly. "Talk about what?" David asked with a brash tone. "You've been ignoring me and it's not fair." David held his chin. "Tabitha, this cheer tricks you are bringing upon me is too much for me to handle." Tabitha heaved as she informed him that they needed to make progress before she began to show. "People will ask questions," she sobbed. "I pretend to be strong, David, but I promise you, I can't handle the stone that will be casted at me if this comes to light." She continued that she will never be able to forgive David for everything he was putting her through. "What do you want, Tabitha?" David asked, his eyes steady. Tabitha reiterated the idea of them moving to a new city where nobody knew them. "You are smart, David. You can find another job," she pressed on, assuring him that she had relatives that could put in words for him. "Let's start all over again. I promise to be by you, support you in everything, and be a hands-on mother to Evelyn and our unborn child." David was caught off guard by the mention of Evelyn needing a mother figure. "Think about it, David." Tabitha's hands instinctively moved to her belly as she stared at David hopefully. David was quiet as his gaze bore into hers. The weight of the complicated situation he is in hung heavily in his heart. The room seemed to hold its breath as he silently weighed his options. David felt trapped. David's resignation came as a shock to his colleague and bosses. He was one of the most promising and brilliant minds at the bank, envisioned to be the next bank manager. Why David? They had all asked, but David gave no clear reasons. He told them he just wanted to get a job and start life in a new city, locking his true reasons away like a well-guarded secret. David's farewell ceremony was bittersweet. He stood there, the weight of his decision etched on his face. His bosses had promised to vouch for him if he needed reference, their words reassuring but not needed. David didn't see the need to visit Anna's mother's scene for a final farewell. He thought it hypocritical of him to go show respect one last time when he had already desecrated the memories of the love they shared by involving himself with her best friend. It was high time he moved on. David had vanished from the town without a word and had gone incommunicado. No new address, no new numbers, no information on his new location. Tabitha too had disappeared, all their properties and personal effects gone with them. It was like they had vanished into thin air. The town buzzed with questions. Friends, colleagues wanted to know of their whereabouts, but no one could reach either of them, and they both didn't have families in that town to get closure from. Weeks passed and their collective concern shifted from curiosity to acceptance. The atmosphere in Tabitha's father's compound was filled with anticipation as Tabitha and David held their traditional marriage. For Tabitha, it was a dream finally coming true. She had orchestrated every detail meticulously and it was all falling into place. She was ecstatic as the ceremony unfolded. David, on the other hand, sat like a silent observer. His expression was impenetrable, except for rare moments when he had to force a smile at Tabitha's relatives. He knew this wasn't what he wanted, but the present predicament he had found himself in had left him no choice. He felt confined in a web of Tabitha's making. Tabitha had planned everything from start to finish. She had employed the service of some hungry old men to pose as David's relatives, while David's real family remained oblivious of the whole happening. The ceremony was small in her father's living room, a far cry from the grand wedding she would typically go for, but all that mattered to Tabitha in that instance was for a bride price to be paid by David. She bore a wide beam on her face as they were declared husband and wife, the words echoing like a final verdict. Tabitha felt victorious. She had alienated Anna, erased her from David's life forever, successfully alienated David from his family and friends. She now owned him all to herself. The laughter erupted within her, a triumphant feeling. She sipped from her cup. It was a toast to herself. She had won, and the taste of victory was sweet. Alright guys, we've come to the end of today's episode of Delilah. Hope you enjoyed watching and listening. Alright, please don't forget to join us next week for our next part of Delilah on Telltale with Lilybeth. Thank you very much for joining us today and do have a nice day. Bye bye.